My younger brother, Paul, drove in from Denver and found me a ghost in my own home. The fridge was bare, the heirlooms gone. He looked at me, his sister who was nothing but skin and bones, and his voice trembled. "Laura, how could you let yourself get this way, when your pension is $6,500 a month?" Before I could get a word out, Kevin stepped out, a look of fake exhaustion on his face, and said dramatically, "All of Mom's money is for Amber to take care of me. I'm seriously ill, and she has a responsibility." The silence that followed was ice cold. Paul stood frozen, staring at the nephew he once adored, as if he were a cold-blooded stranger. Then, very slowly, he placed his leather briefcase on the table, unlatched it, and what he pulled from inside left Kevin speechless. "Hello, I'm Laura Collins. This year, I turned 71, living my peaceful days in a small, sun-drenched apartment in Denver, Colorado. But to find this peace, I had to walk through a terrible storm. And this is that story. A story about how love, when misplaced and without limits, can turn destructive. If this story touches your heart, we'd be so grateful if you'd give it a thumbs up and follow our channel to hear more meaningful stories from folks like me. Your support is the wind beneath our wings, keeping us going. The November chill in Aurora, Colorado, seemed to seep in from more than just the outside. It had crept deep into the bones of my house, turning walls that once echoed with laughter into soulless stone slabs. I sat hunched over on the single remaining dining chair in the kitchen, my thin cardigan doing little to stop the biting cold from seeping through my skin. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door, sounding like the wail of a lost soul, just like me, lost in my own home, in my own life. That familiar gnawing hunger rose up again, a dull, persistent ache that had become my constant companion for months. I licked my dry, chapped lips, trying to swallow the little saliva I had left. I knew what was in the fridge. A single container of yogurt that had expired last week, and a few withered carrots Amber had left behind after picking out the fresh ones for Kevin's special nutritional meal. I didn't dare touch them. The last time I ate a piece of stale bread, Amber had looked at me with disgust, saying I was taking away precious energy from her son. So I just sat there, motionless, listening to the sounds of emptiness, the monotonous tick-tock of the wall clock, the creak of the floorboards upstairs as someone, probably Amber, paced back and forth, and the sound of my own stomach growling in desperation. This house, the one my husband, George, and I had saved our whole lives to buy, the place where we raised Kevin, was now just an empty shell. George's piano, where he used to play Sinatra for me, had been sold. His prized stamp collection, which he cherished like a treasure, was also gone. Everything had been cashed in for a higher purpose, as Kevin always said, my health. Suddenly, a strange sound broke the terrifying silence. The sound of a car slowing down and stopping right in front of my house. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Kevin's car. His Ford Explorer had a much quieter engine. Who could it be? A delivery person? But we hadn't ordered anything. An old friend? No, I had been deliberately avoiding everyone. This shame, this haggard appearance, I didn't want anyone to see it. Curiosity mixed with a vague sense of dread urged me to my feet. My skinny, weak legs trembled as I held onto the table to move. Every step was an effort. I slowly shuffled into the living room, where a plush velvet sofa once sat, now just a cold, empty space. I pressed my eye to the peephole on the door. And then, my heart felt like it stopped. Standing outside, huddled in a beige trench coat, was Paul, my little brother. His face was etched with worry, his eyes constantly scanning as if searching for something. The wind blew through his salt and pepper hair, making him look older than his 59 years. Paul, it had been almost 4 months since I'd seen him. I'd ignored his calls, making up excuse after excuse to turn down his invitations for lunch. I couldn't let him see me like this. I just couldn't. For a crazy moment, I thought about turning away, pretending I wasn't home, but then his hand came up and knocked on the door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was firm, decisive, just like him. He wouldn't give up easily. He was a financial analyst. He always got to the bottom of things. And maybe deep down, I had been waiting for that knock. A weak part of me was screaming for help. Taking a deep breath, I turned the doorknob. The heavy door swung open, bringing a gust of frigid air into the house. Paul was about to knock again when he stopped. The ready-made smile on his face froze as he saw me. I saw confusion in his eyes, which quickly turned to shock and finally to an unconcealed horror. He stared at me, dumbfounded, from my dry, tangled hair, down my gaunt face with its protruding cheekbones, to the oversized old cardigan that hung off my skeletal frame. "Laura?" he choked out, his voice strangled. "My God, Laura, is that really you?" I tried to smile, but my lips trembled, and the smile came out as a grimace. "Paul, you came without calling." My voice was hoarse and weak, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. He didn't say anything else, just stepped over the threshold, slamming the door behind him as if to shut out the cold, but I knew he was trying to shut out the world from seeing this. He took off his coat, tossing it hastily onto the only empty chair, then walked over and wrapped his arms around me. I felt my body disappear in my brother's embrace. His hug was strong, so warm, but it only made me feel my own fragility, my own decay. I heard him take a shaky breath next to my ear. "You're just a bag of bones," he whispered, his voice thick with pain. Tears started to well up in my dry eyes. I had been holding them back for so long. I haven't been feeling well lately. I lied, a weak lie that even I didn't believe. Paul let me go, but his hand stayed firmly on my shoulders. He looked straight into my eyes, the eyes of a man who could see through numbers and lies. "Not well? Laura, this isn't not well. This is something else. Something is terribly wrong." He let go of my shoulders and started to pace around the living room. Every step he took on the bare wood floor echoed eerily. "Where's all the furniture? Where's George's armchair? The bookcase Dad left us? And his piano? Laura, what the hell happened here?" I just stood there, trembling, my hands clasped together. Each of his questions was like a hammer blow to my chest. I knew I had to say something, to make up some story, but my mind was blank. We're redecorating," I stammered. Decided to go for a minimalist look. Paul stopped, turned to look at me, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Minimalist? You call this minimalist? Or just plain empty?" He didn't wait for an answer. He walked straight into the kitchen where I had just been sitting. I heard him open the refrigerator door. A long silence followed. Then I heard the fridge door slam shut with a bang of anger. He came back out, his face flushed, holding a withered carrot. "Is this your minimalist style, Laura? An expired yogurt and a few rotting carrots? What have you been eating to survive?" His voice was getting louder, the initial worry giving way to a rising tide of anger. "Where's your pension? You get $6,500 a month. That's enough for someone to live like a queen. Where is all your money?" I took a step back, feeling cornered. "Paul, calm down. Everything's fine." "Fine?" he nearly shouted. "Don't you dare tell me it's fine." Just then, there were footsteps on the stairs. Kevin and Amber appeared at the top of the landing, drawn by the sound of Paul's voice. Kevin was wearing a navy blue cashmere sweater, looking healthy and rosy-cheeked. Amber, in a silk lounge set, was perfectly made up, her blonde hair coiffed in a flawless bun. They looked down and saw Paul and me facing off in the empty room. "Uncle Paul?" Kevin said, his tone surprised but edged with annoyance. "You didn't call." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. They came down the stairs. Amber quickly came to my side, linking her arm through mine in a show of fake affection. "Mom, what's wrong? You look so tired. Uncle Paul, you shouldn't be stressing her out like this. The doctor said she needs complete rest and quiet." I could feel her fingers digging into my thin arm, a silent warning. Paul ignored Amber. His gaze was fixed on Kevin. "I was just asking your mother where her money is. Can you answer that, Kevin? Or are you also embracing the minimalist style and living on thin air?" Kevin's brow furrowed, his expression turning sour. "What are you talking about? Mom's finances are being managed by Amber and me. She's getting older. She's not sharp enough to handle these things anymore." "Managed?" Paul scoffed, a humorless laugh. "Managed to the point where there isn't a grain of rice in the house, and my sister looks like she just walked out of a concentration camp? Is that your idea of management?" The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I stood between my brother and my son, feeling small and helpless. I wanted to scream, to tell them the whole truth, but my throat felt like it was in a vice. Fear, shame, and a foolish, lingering bit of love for Kevin had locked my lips. Amber started to sob, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up cheeks. "Uncle Paul, How can you say that? You have no idea how hard we've been working. You don't know anything about Kevin's illness." "Illness?" Paul raised an eyebrow. "That old song and dance again?" Kevin stepped forward, positioning himself in front of me and Amber, facing Paul. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and looked my brother straight in the eye. His face held no remorse, no shame. Instead, it held a strange sort of pride, a sickening self-righteousness. And then, he uttered the words that would forever slam the final door on the love in my heart. "All of Mom's pension," Kevin said, his voice loud and clear, echoing in the empty room, "is for Amber to take care of me. I'm very sick, Uncle Paul." He paused for a second, as if to give his words more weight, and then concluded with the cruelest sentence I had ever heard in my life. "She has a responsibility." A dead silence fell over the room. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to stop. Responsibility. The word bored into my mind like a drill. She has a responsibility. Kevin's last two words hung in the cold air between us, sharp and cruel. They weren't an explanation, they were a verdict. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. My brain refused to process the sheer absurdity of that statement. Responsibility? Hadn't my entire life, from the moment I knew I was carrying him, been one long, endless chain of responsibility? His words were like a demonic key, unlocking a door to memories I had tried to seal shut. The bare living room blurred, the angry face of my brother and the smug one of my son fading into a haze. My mind drifted back in time, to a place where my love for him was still pure and unconditional. I saw myself as a 30-year-old woman again, standing in my crisp white nurse's uniform, a medical chart tucked under my arm, walking down the familiar halls of Aurora Medical Center. The strong smell of antiseptic, the clatter of gurney wheels on the linoleum floor, the steady beeping from the patient rooms that was the symphony of my life for 40 years. I chose this profession not for the money, but for a deep-seated desire to care for people, to ease their pain. I thought it was my calling. But my greatest calling began on a hot June night, when I held a tiny, red-faced baby in my arms. Kevin. His eyes were squeezed shut, his tiny hand grasping my finger. In that moment, I made a silent vow to the universe. I would do anything, sacrifice everything, to protect this little being. And I did. I remember the cold winter nights after George, my husband, passed away from that monster, cancer, leaving me alone with a teenage Kevin. The house felt too big, too quiet. The grief almost broke me. But every morning, looking at Kevin's sleepy face, a face that had the same features as George, I found a reason to get up. I couldn't fall apart. My son needed me. I took on extra shifts, working myself to the bone from dawn till dusk. On holidays, while other families gathered around warm dinner tables, I was at the hospital, holding the hand of a dying patient, silently praying for Kevin's well-being at home. My colleagues would often say, "Laura, you need to take a break. You're running yourself ragged." I would just smile and say I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I had to be. Money was always tight. A nurse's salary, even a head nurse's, was just enough to make ends meet. But I scrimped and saved every penny. I cut my own hair, bought clothes from thrift stores, and my lunch was usually just a sandwich I made at home. All my savings went into a single account. Kevin's college fund. I wanted him to have a future that George and I never could. I wanted him to start his life without the burden of debt on his shoulders. I remember the day he got his acceptance letter to the University of Colorado Boulder for business administration. He jumped for joy, throwing his arms around me. "Mom, I did it, I won't let you down," I cried, tears of happiness and pride. That night, I went to George's grave and whispered to him that our son had made it, that our sacrifices hadn't been in vain. His 4 years in college were 4 years of me working myself into the ground. There were weeks I worked over 80 hours. My body ached, my mind was exhausted, but whenever I got an email from Kevin about an interesting class or a successful project, all my fatigue would melt away. The life insurance money George left behind, along with everything I had saved, went straight to the university's tuition account. I had kept my promise to my husband. I had built our son's future with the very bricks of my own sacrifice. The day he graduated, I drove 3 hours to Boulder to attend the ceremony. I didn't even have time to go home and change. I was still in my nurse's uniform from a 12-hour shift. When Kevin Collins was called, and I saw him in his cap and gown, confidently walking across the stage to receive his diploma. My heart swelled with pride. He waved at me from the stage, and I waved back, trying to hold back the tears. It was the best moment of my life. All the hardship, all the sacrifice, it was all worth it. Laura, are you listening to me? Paul's angry voice pulled me back to the present. I blinked, the image of Kevin's graduation dissolving, replaced by my brother's worried face. You zoned out again. Are you okay? I looked over at Kevin. He was still standing there, his expression hard, unmoved by the memory of my sacrifice, a memory he had probably long forgotten, or perhaps never really cared about in the first place. Paul turned to him, his voice now as cold as ice. Responsibility? You just said your mother has a responsibility? Her entire life has been dedicated to you. What more could you possibly want? Amber chimed in again, her voice choked with sobs. You don't understand. Kevin needs special care. We've had to sacrifice so much for his health. Sacrifice? Paul practically roared. What do you call a sacrifice? That silk robe you're wearing, or his designer shoes? Meanwhile, my sister, who worked her fingers to the bone her entire life, doesn't have enough food in her fridge. Are you people even human? The truth in Paul's words was like an electric shock running down my spine. I looked down at my own clothes, a worn-out old sweater and faded pants. Then I looked at my son and daughter-in-law. They looked so well-dressed, so healthy, so well-fed. The contrast was stark, and it was painful. Kevin seemed to realize it too. He avoided Paul's gaze, turning to me, trying a softer tone. Mom, don't listen to Uncle Paul. He's not here. He doesn't understand. Everything we're doing is for the good of the family. When I get better, I'll get a good job, and I'll pay you back. I promise. A promise. How many of those promises had I heard? I won't let you down. I'll take care of you when you're old. Those promises now sounded so hollow. They were just meaningless sounds, uttered to soothe, to cover up a much crueler truth. I looked deep into Kevin's eyes, trying to find a trace of the little boy he used to be, the 8-year-old who would wait up for me after a night shift just to give me a hug and say, "You're the best nurse in the world." But I found nothing. His eyes were now distant, with an invisible wall between us. What was behind that wall? Selfishness? Greed? Or a terrifying level of heartlessness? The pain in my chest was no longer the physical ache of hunger. It was something deeper, a wound in my soul that was bleeding. I had built his future with the bricks of my sacrifice, but perhaps those very bricks had unintentionally built a monster who believed he was entitled to receive, to demand, and that his mother's sacrifice was a given. And as I stood there, between my furious brother and my cold-blooded son, I realized a horrifying truth. I had spent my entire life caring for others, but I had completely failed to care for my own son. Or maybe, I had cared for him too well, so well that he no longer knew how to give, only how to take. When I get better, I'll pay you back, I promise. Kevin's promise hung weakly in the air, thick with hostility. It was like a rotten life raft thrown in my direction, a clumsy attempt to pull me back into my familiar role as the forgiving, trusting mother. But this time, I didn't grab it. I just stood there, looking at him, the grown man I had raised, and wondered, when did the seed of this monstrous change begin to grow? And then, like a slow-motion film, Amber's image appeared in my mind, sharp and vivid. Everything really started to go downhill when she came into the picture. I remembered an evening 3 years ago, in a fancy Italian restaurant in Denver's Cherry Creek neighborhood. The lighting was warm and golden, the music was soft, and the air smelled of sautéed garlic. Kevin had invited me there, saying he had someone special for me to meet. He looked so dapper in a new shirt, his face beaming with happiness, and then Amber walked in. She was like a character straight out of a magazine. Her golden blonde hair was perfectly styled, a sea-green silk dress clung to her slender figure, and her radiant smile showed off a set of perfectly white teeth. She moved with a graceful confidence that turned heads. "Mom, this is Amber," Kevin said, his voice full of pride. "It's so nice to meet you, ma'am," Amber said, her voice as sweet as honey. She took the initiative and gave me a light hug, a hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Kevin has told me so much about you. I truly admire the sacrifice and love you've given him." Those words hit my weak spot. I, a woman who had spent her whole life giving, suddenly felt acknowledged, understood. Throughout dinner, she constantly asked about my work, about my memories with George, and listened intently. She praised my soup as the best in the world, though she'd never tasted it, and complimented my taste based on stories Kevin had told. She was like a talented actress, knowing exactly what role to play and which lines would win over the audience. But something was off. A small detail that I tried to ignore at the time. It was her eyes. When she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze lost its warmth and admiration. It became sharp, calculating. I caught her eyes glancing at the diamond ring George had given me for our anniversary, then quickly down to the watch on my wrist. It wasn't the look of someone getting to know her boyfriend's mother. It was the look of an appraiser. However, I brushed aside that vague unease. I told myself I was being too suspicious, that I was just afraid of losing my place in my son's heart. Kevin looked so happy with her. His smile, his hearty laugh, I hadn't seen them in a long time, and for his happiness, I was willing to love the woman he had chosen. 6 months later, they announced their engagement. "We want a small wedding, Mom," Amber said, sitting next to me on the velvet sofa in the living room. "Just family and our closest friends. How about a cozy ceremony by Dillon Lake?" It sounded so simple and romantic. But then, she started talking about the little details that would make it perfect. A designer wedding dress, peonies imported from the Netherlands, a top photographer from Denver, a reception with fine wines. Each of those little details came with a hefty price tag. Kevin sat there, silent, letting Amber lead the conversation. I saw a flicker of unease on my son's face, but it vanished as soon as Amber turned to him with a loving gaze. "I know we're trying to save," Amber said to Kevin, but her eyes were on me. "But a wedding day is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I want it to be special, for you and for Mom." And then, she turned to me, her eyes welling up with tears. "My parents passed away a long time ago. I don't have anyone else. You're the only mother I have. I just wish I could proudly tell everyone that this is the wedding my mother-in-law helped us put together." That emotional blow was devastatingly effective. How could I say no to an orphaned daughter-in-law who craved a mother's love? How could I shatter my son's dream of a perfect wedding day? I didn't hesitate. I went to the bank and withdrew $15,000 from the retirement fund I had been saving for my old age. It was only enough to cover half the costs, but it was all I could do. When I gave them the check, Amber threw her arms around me and sobbed. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best mother in the world. I promise to take good care of Kevin and to love you like my own mother." Now, standing in this empty room, that promise echoed in my ears like a bitter mockery. Love me like her own mother? She had loved me by taking everything I had, leaving me to starve and suffer. "What are you thinking about, Laura?" Paul's voice brought me back again. I looked at Amber. She was still standing there, hiding behind Kevin, her eyes red, looking so pitiful, so fragile, a perfect wolf in sheep's clothing. Paul seemed to realize it too. He didn't even look at Amber anymore, turning instead to Kevin. "So, when was it? When did you start believing her words more than your own mother's love?" Kevin was flustered. "It's not like that. Amber has always been by my side, taking care of me." "Taking care of you?" Paul cut him off. "Or controlling you? She seems to be very good at that. Was she good at convincing you that selling your father's heirlooms was a good idea? Was she good at convincing you that leaving your own mother to starve was acceptable?" Each of Paul's questions was like a knife twisting into the truth I had tried to deny. I was a mother. I understood the feeling of wanting to do everything to make your child happy, but I also understood that love doesn't mean being blind. It doesn't mean condoning wrongdoing. Kevin, my son, wasn't just blind. He had become an accomplice. Amber started to tremble, not out of fear, but out of anger. "You have no right to judge us. You don't know anything about our love, about the hardships we've been through." "Love?" Paul laughed, a bitter, sarcastic laugh. "Let me tell you what love is. Love is sleepless nights when your child has a fever. Love is working yourself to exhaustion so your child can go to school. Love is being willing to sacrifice everything you have, just like my sister did for her ungrateful son." He pointed a finger at Kevin, his hand shaking with rage. "And you, what have you done? You came along, seduced him, and turned him into a puppet for your own greed. You're a parasite, a blood-sucking leech." Paul's words were cruel, but painfully accurate. Amber's mouth fell open, speechless. She looked to Kevin for protection. And Kevin didn't disappoint her. He stepped forward, shielding Amber, and faced his uncle. "That's enough, Uncle Paul. You will not talk about my wife like that. Get out of my house now." "Your house?" Paul repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is your mother's house. The house she built with her own blood, sweat, and tears. You're nothing but a freeloader." The air was stretched taut. I stood there, a ghost in my own home, witnessing the collapse of everything I had ever believed in. "Get out of my house now." Kevin's command to leave rang out, sharp and brutal. He wasn't just kicking Paul out, he was severing the last thread of our family ties. My house. Those two words confirmed a horrifying truth. I had become a guest, a burden in the very home I had poured my sweat and tears into building. Paul looked at Kevin, then at me. In his eyes, I saw a battle between rage and pity. He wanted to stay, to fight for me, but he also knew that his presence now would only add fuel to the fire, making things even more difficult for me. He took a deep, calming breath. "Fine," Paul said, his voice softer but still firm. "I'll go. But this isn't over, Kevin. Laura, I'll call you later." He gave me one last look, a look full of meaning, then turned, grabbed his coat, and walked swiftly out the door. The slam of the door behind him left a heavy silence, more terrifying than the shouting that had just occurred. Once Paul was gone, Amber immediately dropped her damsel in distress act. She let out a sigh of relief, then shot me a glare, all sweetness gone from her eyes. "See, this is all your fault. If you had just explained things to him from the beginning, it wouldn't have gotten so tense." I didn't know what to say," I whispered. "Didn't know what to say?" Kevin chimed in, his voice laced with irritation. "You just had to tell him the truth, that we're a family and we're getting through a tough time together." I looked at my son, trying to understand his transformation. What had pushed him to this point? What had turned my loving boy into a stranger who would cast out his only remaining relative? And then, my mind was pulled back to 16 months ago, to the fateful day that had changed everything, the day the deadly lie was planted. I remember it was a sweltering summer afternoon. I was watering the geraniums on the porch when Kevin's car pulled up. He got out, looking dazed, his shoulders slumped. I'd never seen him like that before. Not even on the day George died had he looked so defeated. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I rushed to him. He didn't say anything, just threw his arms around me, burying his head in my shoulder like a little boy. I could feel his shoulders shaking. "I got laid off, Mom." My heart sank. I led him inside and made him a cup of chamomile tea to calm his nerves. He told me the software company where he worked was restructuring and his position was cut. "I did everything right, Mom. I worked weekends, I hit all my targets, but they still let me go." I comforted him, telling him it wasn't his fault, that he was talented and would soon find a better job. But I could see his confidence had taken a serious hit. A few days later, Amber called me. "Laura, I'm so worried about Kevin," she said, her voice filled with concern. "He just locks himself in his room, he's not eating. I'm afraid he's falling into a depression." And then they made the temporary decision. They would give up their expensive downtown Denver apartment and move in with me for a few months, just until Kevin finds a new job and gets back on his feet. I didn't hesitate for a second. A mother's arms are always open. "Of course you can come here. My home is your home." I cleaned out the guest room, bought new sheets, and filled the fridge with all of Kevin's favorite foods. I happily gave them my master bedroom, the room George and I had shared for so many years, thinking, they're young, they need their privacy. The first few weeks were peaceful enough. Kevin spent most of his time in his room, updating his resume and networking. Amber played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, helping me cook and clean, and constantly asking about my health. But slowly, I started to notice things that were off. Kevin never went on any interviews. Whenever I asked, he'd say, "The market is really tough right now," or "I'm aiming for more senior positions." Meanwhile, Amber started shopping, a lot. Designer handbags and expensive dresses were constantly being delivered to the house. When I questioned it, she would just smile and say, "This is from my personal savings. I just wanted to buy a few things to cheer myself up during this difficult time." And then, the main act of their charade began. One evening, they called me into the living room. They both looked incredibly serious. On the coffee table was a stack of professionally printed color documents. "Mom, there's something we need to tell you," Kevin began, his voice trembling. "Losing my job. It wasn't that simple. I held my breath. Amber took my hand. Hers was ice cold. Laura, Kevin's been having some strange symptoms lately. He's constantly tired, his muscles ache, and he's been having memory problems. At first, we thought it was just stress from losing his job. She paused, taking a deep breath, as if preparing to deliver terrible news. We had a private video consultation with a top neurology specialist in Switzerland, and the results were devastating. She pushed the stack of papers towards me. I glanced at them, seeing complex medical terms I'd never heard of, despite my 40 years as a nurse. Rare chronic neurological fatigue syndrome. The doctor says it's a rare genetic condition. Kevin continued, his voice full of despair. It attacks the central nervous system. There's no cure in conventional medicine right now, but there is a glimmer of hope. Amber flipped to another page, pointing at complex charts and images. There's an experimental stem cell therapy in Europe. The success rate is very high, but it's incredibly expensive. And of course, insurance doesn't cover it. I sat there, stunned. My head was spinning. A rare disease? Genetic? Permanent paralysis? The words hammered at my mind. As a mother, my greatest fear wasn't my own death, but watching my child suffer. The doctor said, Amber continued, her voice a whisper as if to soften the blow, that if he doesn't get treatment soon, within the next 5 years, Kevin could be completely paralyzed. The tears started to flow. I couldn't think straight anymore. All my reason, all my nursing experience, was drowned out by a mother's fear. All I could see was the image of my son wasting away, and a tiny flicker of hope in a far-off European country. How much do we need? I asked, my voice trembling. Kevin and Amber looked at each other. A lot, Mom, Kevin said, his voice full of pain. We've sold all our stocks, used up all our savings, but it's still not enough. Then take mine, I said without a moment's hesitation. Take it all, what good is money? As long as you can be healthy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at my wedding photo with George. I wondered if this was a test fate had given my family. And I promised myself, promised George's spirit, that I would do anything and everything to save our son. Now, with the naked truth laid bare, I realize how foolish I was. I didn't verify anything. I didn't ask for the doctor's name. I didn't demand to see a single official medical record. I was blinded by my own love. I was ready to believe anything, as long as it gave me a reason to sacrifice. That lie, wrapped in fancy medical jargon and crocodile tears, was the turning point. It transformed me from the head of the household into an endless source of cash. Then take mine, take it all. My words that night, spoken in a haze of panic and desperation, became an unwritten contract, an unlimited permission slip. It handed Kevin and Amber the key to the only treasure I had left, my financial security for my old age, and they didn't waste a single moment using it. The next day, Amber came to me with a cup of hot ginger tea. Drink this, Mom, it'll warm you up, she said in a gentle voice. You must have been so worried last night. She sat down beside me, her face a mask of concern. Mom, I know this is hard, but we need to act fast. I contacted the clinic in Switzerland again, and they said there's an open spot for treatment next month. We have to make a deposit right away, or we'll lose the opportunity. Still reeling from fear, I nodded eagerly. What do we need to do? The problem is, international money transfers are complicated. Amber explained smoothly, as if she had rehearsed this script. It requires a lot of paperwork and verification, and Kevin, as you can see, is not in the right state of mind to handle that kind of stress. As for you, I don't want you to have to worry about a single thing more. She placed her hand on mine, her eyes full of sympathy. How about, you just give me your bank card and PIN? I'll handle all the transactions, pay for the treatments, buy the medications. All you need to do is rest, take care of yourself, and pray for Kevin. Let me carry the rest of the burden. Her logic sounded flawless. It played right into my state of mind at the time. A grieving mother who just wanted to focus on her son and not be bothered with tedious procedures. I felt grateful to have such a capable and thoughtful daughter-in-law. Are you sure, dear? I asked, a flicker of instinctual hesitation remaining. Handing over complete control of my finances was a huge step. Of course, Amber smiled, a reassuring smile. I'll keep a careful record of every expense and report back to you. You can trust me completely. And I did. I went into my bedroom, took out the debit card I had used for years, wrote the PIN on a small piece of paper, and gave it to her. The moment Amber took the card, I saw a glint in her eye. A fleeting glint, almost imperceptible, but looking back now, I know it was the glint of triumph. The fish had taken the bait. From that day on, I had officially abdicated my power. For the first few weeks, Amber played the role of a diligent financial manager perfectly. Every few days, she would show me fake emails and sophisticated-looking electronic invoices from the Geneva Stem Cell Clinic. This is the payment for the first batch of herbal supplements. Mom, this is the consultation fee with the specialist. This is the deposit for the hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Thousands of dollars were being withdrawn from my account. I watched my balance shrink with a heavy heart, but I comforted myself with the thought that every dollar spent was a step closer to Kevin's recovery. Meanwhile, Kevin played the part of a deteriorating patient. He came out of his room less and less, constantly complaining of invisible aches and brain fog. He stopped looking for a job, claiming he no longer had the physical or mental strength. He became completely dependent on Amber. Everything, from his meals and medications, which were actually just cheap multivitamins in fancy bottles, to his communication with the outside world, was orchestrated by Amber. They had created a perfect bubble of illness, and I was the one on the outside, supplying the air to keep it inflated. About a month later, Amber came to me again, this time with an even more serious expression. "Mom, there's a problem," she said. "Your bank's online security is a bit weak. I'm worried about making such large transactions. I think we should increase the security. I'll help you change your online password and set up two-factor authentication through my phone. It'll be much safer that way." Once again, her reasoning sounded plausible. I, a woman in my late 60s with little knowledge of technology, readily agreed. I didn't realize that with that action, I was cutting off my last access to my own account. From then on, I was completely in the dark about my own finances. I no longer received email notifications, and I couldn't log in to check my balance myself. I had become a blind person in my own financial world, completely dependent on Amber's verbal reports. And with financial control firmly in their grasp, they began the next phase, taking over my living space. It started with small comments. "Mom, this armchair of George's is so old, the dust is not good for Kevin's respiratory system. Mom, the colors in these landscape paintings are a bit dark. They make the room feel heavy, which affects his mood." At first, I resisted. "Those are my husband's heirlooms." Amber immediately feigned remorse. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just worried about Kevin's health. The doctor said a bright, positive living environment is very important for his treatment." There it was again. Kevin's health. That magic phrase had incredible power. It crushed all my resistance, and so, George's armchair was sold online. The paintings he loved were taken down, replaced by cold, bare white walls. It happened gradually, incrementally, like a slow-acting poison. They didn't get rid of everything at once. Every week, another item would disappear. The antique bookcase, the vinyl record collection, the grandfather clock in the corner. Each time, there was a plausible excuse. "We need more money for a new medication. The room needs more space for a special air purifier." I backed down, time and time again. I told myself that material possessions were just things, that my son's health was what mattered most. I didn't realize that they weren't just selling my belongings. They were erasing my presence, erasing my memories, turning my home into a soulless space that served only their purposes. Once a person loses control over their money and their living space, they quickly realize how fragile their self-worth is. From the day I handed Amber my bank card, my house was no longer a home. It slowly morphed into a prison, its walls painted with false words of love, and I was its sole inmate, held captive by my own maternal instincts. The erosion didn't happen with whips and chains, but with small, subtle, and far crueler actions. It started at the dinner table. My kitchen used to be filled with the wonderful smells of home cooking. I loved to cook, to prepare nutritious meals. But now, the kitchen was Amber's domain. She announced that she would be responsible for the family's nutrition, especially for the patient, Kevin. Following the guidelines of the European nutritionist, she declared solemnly, "Kevin needs a special diet. high in clean protein, gluten-free, sugar-free, and completely organic. Every calorie must be precisely calculated. It sounded very scientific and reasonable. But that special diet only applied to the two of them. Every evening, I would sit at one end of the dining table, watching them enjoy fragrant, pan-seared grass-fed steaks, colorful quinoa salads with avocado and walnuts, or steaming hot, foil-baked salmon. The aroma of the food filled the air, a delicious torture to my empty stomach. And my portion? Mom, at your age, your digestive system is much weaker, Amber would say in a tone of feigned concern as she placed a bowl of watery vegetable soup in front of me, made from the cheapest frozen vegetables from the supermarket. You need to eat light, easily digestible foods. Too much protein and fat will put a strain on your liver and kidneys. At first, I tried to believe her explanation. I told myself she was just looking out for my health. But then, the vegetable soup was gradually replaced by plain white congee. And then the congee was replaced by a few slices of dry bread and a glass of water. One time, I couldn't take it anymore. I was so hungry, I felt dizzy. I asked, my voice trembling, "Amber, could I please have a small piece of chicken?" She stopped chewing and looked at me as if I had asked for something outrageous. "Mom, I already told you, this chicken is marinated with special spices just for Kevin. It's not good for your blood pressure." Kevin, sitting across from me, didn't even look up from his plate. He just mumbled, "Listen to Amber, Mom. She knows what's best for everyone's health." What's best for your health? That phrase became a curse, an excuse to justify all their neglect. I was being systematically starved, right in my own kitchen, for the irrefutable reason of my own well-being. My weight began to drop alarmingly. My clothes became baggy. I could feel my cheekbones becoming more prominent every time I looked in the mirror. I wasn't just starved, I was isolated. My friends, my old colleagues, would occasionally call to invite me for coffee or to a book club meeting, but Amber always answered the phone. "Oh, hi Susan," I would hear her say to one of my closest friends. "Laura is resting right now. She hasn't been feeling well lately. The doctor advised her to limit her outings." Yes, I'll pass on the message. Thank you for your concern." Of course, she never passed on the message. Gradually, the calls became less frequent. My friends must have thought I no longer wanted to see them. I became a lonely island, cut off from the outside world. The prison walls were closing in. The deprivation didn't stop at food or social connections. It extended to the most basic needs. The heat was rarely turned on in the winter. "The dry air isn't good for Kevin's lungs," Amber would explain as she and Kevin snuggled under expensive wool blankets in their bedroom with its own space heater. As for me, I had to wear multiple layers of old clothes and an extra thin, worn-out blanket to fight off the bone-chilling Colorado cold. Once, I caught a bad cold. A persistent cough kept me up all night. I asked Kevin for a little money to buy some cough syrup. He frowned, his face full of annoyance. "You were a nurse. You know how to take care of yourself," he snapped. "The money now has to be prioritized for my more important medications." I was speechless. In my 40-year career, I had cared for thousands of patients. But now, when I was sick myself, I couldn't even afford a few dollars for a bottle of cough syrup. That night, I lay awake, not just from the coughing, but from the bitterness and humiliation that was eating away at my soul. My life drifted on, day after day, in a hazy fog of hunger, cold, and loneliness. I lost track of time. I no longer knew what day it was, no longer remembered holidays or anniversaries. Every day was the same, an endless loop of waiting for the next meager meal, waiting for a rare bit of warmth, waiting for some miracle to come and set me free. I started talking to myself. I would talk to George, telling him everything, as if he were still sitting in his familiar armchair, the one that had been sold long ago. Sometimes, I would even hear his voice answering me, comforting me that everything would be all right. Maybe I was really starting to lose my mind. Or maybe it was the only way my mind could protect itself from a reality that was too cruel. I had become a ghost in my own home. I moved quietly, trying not to make a sound, trying to be invisible to avoid their annoyed glances and sharp words. I was living in a prison without bars, without guards, but with no way out. There is a limit to human endurance, both physically and mentally. For months, I had been pushed towards that limit, one step at a time, slowly but surely. And then, one October evening, as the first winds of winter began to seep through the cracks of the cold house, I was pushed over the edge. That day, I had only eaten 2 slices of dry bread in the morning. Amber said she was too busy taking care of Kevin to make me lunch. For dinner, they ordered a large pizza. The smell of melted cheese and pepperoni filled the house, a sweet torture to my stomach, which was cramping with hunger. I sat in the kitchen, swallowing, hoping they would leave me a small piece. But they ate it all, not a single crumb left. That night, the hunger tormented me so much I couldn't sleep. It was no longer a dull ache, but a sharp, stabbing pain. I felt dizzy, my head was spinning, and my heart was racing. I knew these signs. They were symptoms of hypoglycemia, combined with my high blood pressure, which had gone untreated for months. I felt a real fear, a fear of death. I didn't want to die like this, starving and neglected in my own home. A desperate urge rose up in me, stronger than the fear of Amber's scolding. I had to eat something, anything. I shakily got out of bed, my bare feet barely feeling the cold floor. I felt my way along the wall in the dark, moving slowly like a thief, holding my breath. There was no sound from their bedroom. They must have been fast asleep after their full meal. I tiptoed into the kitchen. The faint moonlight coming through the window cast an eerie glow on the empty cabinets. I opened the pantry, hoping to find a forgotten package of crackers or a box of cereal. Nothing. Just spice jars and a few boxes of cheap tea. I opened the fridge. The dim light inside illuminated a heartbreaking emptiness. And then, I saw it. Tucked away on the bottom shelf of the pantry, hidden behind empty boxes, was a can of tuna. A small, cheap can of tuna. Amber must have bought it a long time ago and forgotten about it. To me, at that moment, that can of tuna was more precious than gold. It was life. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I almost cried with joy. I searched for the can opener in the drawer, but just as I got my hands on it, a dark figure suddenly appeared in the kitchen doorway. "What are you doing?" Amber's voice cut through the silence of the night, cold and sharp as a razor. I jumped, nearly dropping the can. My heart hammered in my chest. I'm hungry," I whispered, feeling like a child caught stealing cookies. Amber flicked on the kitchen light. The bright glare made me squint. She crossed her arms, looking at me with undisguised contempt. Her eyes darted from my terrified face to the can of tuna in my hand. "This," she said, stepping forward and snatching the can from my hand, "is for Kevin's nutrition. He needs the protein to maintain his muscle mass. You've already had dinner." "But I didn't eat anything," I protested weakly. "You two ate all the pizza." "Don't lie," she snapped. "Eating too much at night causes indigestion and fat storage. I'm only doing what's best for your health." She placed the can of tuna on the highest shelf, a place my frail body and depleted strength could never reach. That was the final straw. Something inside me broke. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't outrage. It was a cold, hard acceptance. I had seen the true face of cruelty, no longer masked by any false words of concern. They weren't just neglecting me. They were doing it on purpose. They wanted me weak. They wanted me gone. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked silently back to my room. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, staring into the darkness, and a decision began to form in my mind. I couldn't go on like this. I had to do something. The next morning, I waited until Amber and Kevin went out. They said they had an important doctor's appointment. Another blatant lie, I knew. As soon as the door closed behind them, I sprang into action. I rummaged through all the drawers, hoping to find some loose change they might have forgotten. Finally, under the lining of an old purse, I found a crumpled $5 bill. To me, at that moment, it was a fortune. Then, I went to the old landline phone in the living room, the one they rarely used. My hands shook as I dialed the number. A number I hadn't called in a long time, but still remembered by heart. Paul's office number. I knew it was a gamble. Kevin had warned me not to contact Paul. He wouldn't understand and would only make things more complicated, he had said. But I had no other choice. The phone rang, once, twice. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. What if Paul wasn't in the office? What if his secretary wouldn't put me through? "Evans Financial Analysis and Law. How can I help you?" A professional female voice answered. Please let me speak to Mr. Paul Evans," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Tell him it's Laura." Please hold. Every second of waiting felt like an eternity. I listened to the soulless, generic hold music, and then a familiar voice came on the line, a voice I hadn't heard in person for so long. Laura? Is that you? What's wrong? I've called you a dozen times. Hearing his worried voice, the wall of fortitude I had tried so hard to maintain crumbled. Tears started to stream down my face, uncontrollable sobs shaking my body. Paul, I cried, help me, please, help me. I barely managed to get those words out, because at that very moment, I heard the sound of a key in the front door. They were back. In a panic, I slammed the phone down, but it was too late. When Kevin walked in, he saw me standing by the phone, my face streaked with tears. His face darkened. He glanced at the phone, then at me. Who were you just calling? He asked, his voice as cold as ice. I didn't answer. I just backed away, terrified. He strode over and snatched the phone from my hand. I told you not to bother Uncle Paul. You're getting confused again, aren't you? You're just making things more complicated. He ranted, then turned to Amber, who had just walked in. I told you, her memory is getting worse. We need to manage her more closely. I stood there, frozen, listening to my own son discuss with his wife how to manage me as if I were a child with no mind of my own. My desperate cry for help was like a stone thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that could not be stopped. Even though Kevin had tried to quash it immediately, the message had been sent. And Paul, my brother, had received it. 2 days after that call, on a gloomy Friday afternoon, Paul's familiar silver Ford Explorer turned onto my street. This time, he didn't come alone. And he didn't come with the mindset of a brother visiting his sister. He came prepared like a financial analyst about to conduct a grueling audit. I saw his car through a gap in the curtains. My heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. I didn't know how to face him, nor did I know how to face the impending wrath of Kevin and Amber. When the doorbell rang, it was Kevin who answered. I heard his voice, cold and defensive. Uncle Paul? I thought I made it clear that Mom needs her rest. I'm here to make sure she's resting properly. Paul's voice boomed, sharp and uncompromising. Step aside. I heard Paul's heavy footsteps enter the house. He didn't stop in the living room. He walked straight into the kitchen where I was sitting, huddled in my usual chair. When he saw me, his face no longer held the shock of his previous visit. Instead, it was filled with a deep pain and a steely determination. Hello, Laura, he said softly. But his eyes were scanning the kitchen, taking in every detail of the deprivation. Amber and Kevin followed him in, their faces hostile. What are you doing here? Amber demanded, her voice sharp. You're invading our privacy. Privacy? Paul turned to face them. This time, he wasn't yelling. His voice was low and even, but its calmness was more terrifying. I think we need to talk about finances, openly and transparently. He placed a thick leather briefcase on the dining table. The thud of the briefcase hitting the table echoed in the silent room. For the past 2 days, I've been busy, Paul began, opening the briefcase and taking out a stack of papers. As a named party in Laura's will and on several of her trust accounts, I have the legal right to request detailed transaction statements from the bank. And what I found was interesting. Kevin and Amber exchanged a look, a flicker of panic in their eyes. Let's start with the basic numbers, Paul said, putting on his reading glasses and looking at the first sheet. 16 months. Laura's pension is $6,500 a month. In total, over the past 16 months, exactly $104,000 has been deposited into her account. He looked up, staring directly at Kevin. $104,000. A pretty hefty sum, isn't it? Now, let's see where it went. He flipped to another page. In the first week after you two moved in, there was a $5,000 cash withdrawal. The note says, initial medical expenses. Kevin, can you show me the receipt for this expense? Kevin stammered. That was the deposit for the clinic in Switzerland. They don't issue receipts right away. Really? Paul raised an eyebrow. Because I called every major stem cell clinic in Geneva. None of them have a patient named Kevin Collins. Strange. Kevin's face turned pale. Amber quickly jumped in. It's a small private clinic. They're very discreet. You can't just call and check like that. Paul ignored her, continuing to read from the statement. Next, we have a series of regular monthly payments to American Express and Visa, totaling about $2,500 a month. This must be for the expensive herbal supplements? He paused, then continued with a sarcastic tone. No, this is to pay off credit card debt in Amber Collins' name. Debts accumulated from shopping sprees at Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, and trips to Hawaii and Mexico from before you even got sick, Kevin. Amber gasped. How did you know? I'm a financial analyst. Following the money is my job, Paul replied curtly. So, out of the $104,000, $40,000 was used to pay off your lavish lifestyle. Silence enveloped the room. I sat there, listening to the numbers being read out, and it felt like I was being stabbed with each one. My money, the retirement I had worked my entire life to save. It had been used to pay for handbags and vacations I had never even dared to dream of. But that's not all, Paul continued, his voice growing colder. We also have direct transfers to a business account named Amber's Boutique, a total of $35,000. The note says investment for the future. It seems curing Kevin also involved funding a fashion boutique. It was a backup plan, Amber explained hastily. If Kevin's treatment didn't work, we still needed a source of income. A very clever backup plan, Paul nodded. But unfortunately, according to the business records of the city of Denver, Amber's Boutique filed for bankruptcy 2 months ago due to business losses. So, $35,000 of my sister's money vanished into a failed business dream. He flipped to the last page. After deducting the debt payments and investments, we're left with $29,000 over 16 months. That's about $1,800 a month for all other living expenses: food, electricity, water, gas, and of course, Kevin's medication. Seems reasonable, doesn't it? Paul took off his glasses and looked them straight in the face. But I checked. The average utility bill for this house is only about $400 a month. So, tell me, what kind of food did you buy with the remaining $1,400 a month that there isn't a single piece of meat in my sister's fridge and she looks like she's starving to death? No one answered. The truth had been laid bare by irrefutable numbers. Paul stood up and walked around the table. And I found something else. 2 weeks ago, there was an attempt to access Laura's investment account, an account worth $40,000. The request failed because it required two-factor authentication through her phone, the phone you two have hidden. He stopped right behind Kevin. You weren't just draining her pension. You were planning to take her last bit of savings. You planned to take everything. The silence in the room was almost audible. I could see Kevin's shoulders shaking. Amber had her head bowed, her blonde hair hiding what must have been a panicked expression. I gave you a chance to tell the truth, Paul said, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. But you didn't. You chose to keep lying. He returned to the table and put the papers back in his briefcase. So now, we'll do things differently. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to call my lawyer, Mr. Wright. And then, I'm going to call Adult Protective Services. I'm going to show them these bank statements. I'm going to show them my sister's condition. And I'm going to let the law decide what your illnesses and your care really are. At that moment, Amber lifted her head, her eyes red, but not with remorse, with fear. No, she screamed. You can't do that. You'll ruin our lives. Your lives, Paul scoffed. What about my sister's life? Haven't you already ruined it? Paul's threat, I'm going to let the law decide, was like a thunderclap. It shattered the tense silence, replacing it with sheer panic. The elaborate play that Kevin and Amber had meticulously constructed over the past 16 months was crumbling before their eyes, and they knew that once this curtain fell, there would be no turning back. No, you can't do that, Amber shrieked, her voice stripped of all its sweetness, now just the shrill sound of fear. She lunged from her chair, trying to snatch the phone from Paul's hand. This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere. Paul easily brushed her hand away. It stopped being a family matter when you turned my sister into a walking ATM and left her to waste away. Now, it's a criminal case. Kevin, who had been silent since Paul started reading the numbers, finally acted, not with remorse, but with a last-ditch effort to save his act. He turned to me, his eyes wide with pleading. Mom, say something. Tell Uncle Paul you helped us willingly. Tell him we're a family. Mom. His voice pulled me out of my stupor. All eyes in the room were on me. I was the sole witness, the final judge in this bitter family court. My brother was waiting for a confirmation of justice. My son was begging for a lie to save his skin. I looked at Kevin. I looked at the face I had loved and kissed a million times. I tried to find a trace of the little boy he once was, but I couldn't. I only saw a terrified stranger. And I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my empty lungs, giving me a strange sort of strength. I tried to stand up. My legs were shaking, and I had to hold onto the table for support. "Paul," I began, my voice weak and hoarse, but clear. "Paul is right." Just 3 words. But those 3 words carried the weight of a mountain. Kevin's face went white as a sheet. Amber took a step back, looking at me as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You two," I continued, each word squeezed out from my pain. "You lied to me. You took my money. You starved me." As I spoke those words, a sharp pain suddenly erupted in my chest. It wasn't the pain of hunger. It was something else, much more intense and stabbing. My breathing became rapid. My head was spinning. The room started to sway. "Laura, what's wrong?" I heard Paul yell, his voice full of panic. I tried to hold onto the table, but my strength was gone. Everything in front of me started to blur. The last thing I saw was Paul's terrified face rushing towards me. And then, everything went black. Later, after I had woken up, it was Paul who told me what had happened in that horrifying moment. A story that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. When I collapsed to the floor, Paul's first instinct, as a loving brother, was to rush to my side. He knelt down, cradled my head, and screamed my name in desperation. With one hand, he tried to find my pulse, while his other hand trembled as he pulled out his phone to call 911. But in that life or death moment, as his mind was screaming with fear, something made him look up. Maybe it was an unusual silence, or maybe it was a gut feeling. And he saw the truth. Kevin and Amber didn't rush to help. They didn't scream. They weren't panicking. They just stood there, motionless on the other side of the table, like 2 cold statues. And they were looking at each other. Paul said he would never forget that look, a look that held not a single ounce of worry or compassion. Instead, it was a sickening mixture of calculation and triumph. And then, in the almost absolute silence of the room, broken only by Paul's gasps and his stammering voice on the phone with the 911 operator, he heard a whisper. A cold, evil whisper, not meant for his ears, but he heard it clearly. It was Amber's voice. "So it's almost over," she whispered to Kevin, an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "The $250,000 life insurance policy. The house is valued at nearly $400,000 too. Did you double-check that we are the sole beneficiaries, Kevin?" Paul said that in that instant, time seemed to stop. His pain and fear of losing me were suddenly replaced by a cold, sickening revulsion that ran down his spine. He understood everything. This wasn't just a case of financial abuse driven by greed and selfishness. It wasn't neglect born of carelessness. This was a plan, a deliberate, calculated plan. They didn't just want my money. They didn't just want my house. They wanted me dead. My stroke wasn't a tragedy to them. It was the final stage of their plan. The event they had been waiting for, perhaps even silently encouraging by eroding my health day by day. My death would be their winning lottery ticket, a fortune of nearly $750,000. When the paramedics burst into the house a few minutes later, they found a strange scene. A man desperately trying to save an unconscious woman, while her son and daughter-in-law just stood watching from a distance, their faces as emotionless as strangers. Paul didn't say anything to them then. He was too shocked, too disgusted to speak. He just silently followed the ambulance, leaving Kevin and Amber alone in the empty house with their horrific secret. But in his mind, Amber's whisper still echoed, and he knew that this fight was no longer about money. It had become a fight for justice for his sister, who lay between life and death. The first thing I saw was white, a glaring, institutional white ceiling. The smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils, familiar yet foreign. I heard the steady beeping of a heart monitor, a sound I had heard thousands of times throughout my career, but never thought would be measuring my own life. I had survived. I turned my head with difficulty. Paul was sitting in the chair beside my bed, his head in his hands. He looked 10 years older. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his salt and pepper hair seemed more gray. Hearing me stir, he shot up. His eyes were red and watery. "Laura, you're awake," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with emotion. He quickly took my hand, a bony hand covered in IV lines. "You scared the hell out of me." I tried to say something, but my throat was dry. I could only move my lips. Paul understood and quickly poured me some water. After a few sips, I was able to ask my first question. "Where are they?" Paul was silent for a moment. His expression hardened, the gentleness of seeing me awake replaced by a cold fury. "Don't you worry about them anymore. It's all been taken care of." And then, he told me about the horrifying moment I collapsed, about Amber's evil whisper, about Kevin's complicit gaze. Hearing it, I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I just felt a hollow emptiness, a quiet death of the last bit of love I had tried to hold on to for my son. Paul explained that right after I was taken to the emergency room, the first thing he did was call his lawyer, Mr. Wright. He didn't just tell him about the financial abuse, but also about the plot he had overheard. Mr. Wright, a seasoned lawyer, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. This was no longer a civil case. They immediately filed for a temporary restraining order, preventing Kevin and Amber from accessing any of my assets, including the house and my bank accounts. At the same time, they reported the entire incident to the Arapahoe County District Attorney's Office, along with the financial statements and Paul's sworn testimony as a witness. When Kevin and Amber arrived at the hospital the next day, probably to check on the situation and see how their plan was progressing, they were not allowed to see me. Instead, they were greeted by 2 police officers and Mr. Wright. Paul said that when confronted with the official accusations, especially Paul's testimony about the insurance plot, their facade completely shattered. Amber, the one who always appeared so tough and in control, had a complete breakdown. She started screaming, denying everything, and then, in her panic, she did what selfish accomplices often do. She blamed everything on Kevin. "It was his idea. All of it," she shrieked. "He said his mother was weak and wouldn't live much longer anyway. He said it was the money he deserved." Kevin, his face as white as a ghost, could only stand there, stammering, "No, that's not. She put me up to it." Their finger-pointing only made their guilt more obvious. They were arrested right there at the hospital. Their fate was decided not by a civil settlement, but by a criminal trial, facing a slew of charges: elder financial abuse, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and even a more serious charge related to endangering my life. Their lawyers advised them to plead guilty for a lighter sentence. Amber, with a less than clean past that investigators had dug up, received a harsh sentence. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The judge called her actions predatory, cruel, and inhumane. As for Kevin, my son, thanks to his late cooperation and his more passive role in the plot, though I knew full well that his passivity was complicity, he received a lighter sentence. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and after his release, he would have to serve another 5 years of probation, during which he would have to perform community service and attend ethics courses. Of course, all the assets they had stolen were seized. The new car, the designer goods, everything was sold to partially compensate for the damages. The civil restitution agreement was still in place, a debt they would have to pay off gradually after their release, a constant reminder of their crimes. I did not attend the trial. I didn't want to see their faces. I only read the outcome through Paul's account. When I heard about Kevin's sentence, I didn't feel a sense of victory, nor did I feel sorrow. I just felt an endless fatigue. A chapter of my life had officially closed, in a tragic and painful way. I had to stay in the hospital for nearly a month. The minor stroke, combined with prolonged malnutrition, had caused some damage. I had to learn to walk steadily again, to do physical therapy to regain strength in my left arm, but I recovered, miraculously. The doctors said my will to live was extraordinary, but I knew it wasn't just my will. It was thanks to Paul. He was by my side every day, feeding me, reading to me, and simply sitting there in silence, letting me know I was no longer alone. From my hospital bed, I made my final decision. I authorized Paul to sell the house in Aurora. I couldn't go back there. Every corner, every wall was tainted with horrifying memories. That house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. After I was discharged, I moved to Denver, into a small, lovely apartment near Paul's house. With the money from the sale of the house and the assets that were returned to me, I could live a comfortable life. I started a new chapter. I joined a support group for elderly victims of abuse. I shared my story, not to complain, but to warn, to help others. I reconnected with my old friends, who welcomed me back with open arms and no judgment. I started painting, a hobby I had put aside in my youth. Occasionally, I receive letters from prison. Letters from Kevin. At first, they were filled with self-pity and blame. Gradually, they shifted to words of remorse. He said he was in therapy in prison, that he had realized the terrible mistake he had made. I read those letters, but I don't reply. A year later, on a clear autumn morning, Paul came to visit. He brought another letter. "This one is different," he said. "He's asking if, someday, when he gets out, you might give him a chance to meet, to apologize in person." I looked out the window at the yellow leaves fluttering down. I thought about that question for a long time. Could I forgive? And then I realized, forgiveness isn't a gift I give to him, it's a gift I give to myself. But I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be. I turned to Paul and smiled, the first truly peaceful smile I'd had in a very long time. "Write back to him," I said. "Tell him his mother died in that house in Aurora. The woman who lives here is named Laura, and she's very busy living the rest of her life." I was no longer a betrayed mother. I was no longer a pitiful victim. I was Laura, a survivor, and that was my rebirth, my sweetest and most complete revenge. Present day. Every morning, I wake up not to an alarm clock, but to the first rays of sunshine filtering through my window. I make myself a cup of chamomile tea, step out onto my small balcony where I grow pots of geraniums and lavender, and quietly watch the city slowly come to life. This is the most peaceful moment of my day. In these quiet moments, I often reflect on everything that has happened. I no longer feel resentment or bitterness. Instead, there's a strange sense of clarity. I realize that the tragedy of my life didn't stem from Amber's greed or Kevin's weakness. It stemmed from my own love. A love that gave without asking, sacrificed without thinking, and was so blind that it turned me into a tool for others to exploit. The biggest lesson I learned, a lesson I often share at the support center, is this: true love must always be accompanied by respect. And the first, most important respect is self-respect. We can love our children unconditionally, but that doesn't mean we have to accept unconditional abuse. Boundaries are necessary, not to push our children away, but to teach them that their mother is also a human being, with her own needs, feelings, and limits. I failed to draw that line, and the price was almost my life. I also learned that forgiveness is a complex journey. Do I forgive Kevin? Perhaps, in a way, I have. I've forgiven the lost child inside him, the child whose conscience was perhaps clouded by fear and manipulation, but I cannot forget. To forget would be to deny my own pain, to deny the lesson I paid so dearly to learn. And more importantly, I realize that forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. I can wish him well from a safe distance, without having to reopen the door that once let the storm into my life. As for them, life after prison has not been easy. Paul still gives me occasional updates, not out of curiosity, but because he knows I need to know that justice is still being served. Amber, after her release, disappeared without a trace. I heard she moved to another state, changed her identity, and is probably starting a new hunt. Some people's nature never changes. I no longer waste my thoughts on her. She is just a ghost from my past. Kevin has been out of prison for a year now. His life is a long road of atonement. He works 2 jobs, a manual labor job in a warehouse during the day and a cleaning job at night. He lives in a cheap rented room. Every month, without fail, a large portion of his meager salary is automatically transferred to a trust fund I've set up. I don't use the money. It will all be donated to organizations that protect abused elders. It's the only way to turn my tragedy into something meaningful. Paul says he looks much older and worn down. He no longer contacts any of his old friends. He lives a lonely, quiet life. He still writes to me sometimes, no longer begging, but just talking about his work, his thoughts. He says the image of me collapsing on the floor and Amber's whisper is the nightmare that haunts him every night. Perhaps that is his life sentence, an invisible prison he will have to carry with him for the rest of his days. I stand on my balcony, taking a deep breath of the fresh morning air. The eastern sky is glowing with a vibrant orange-pink. A new day is beginning. I am no longer a mother broken by betrayal. I am no longer a pitiful victim. I am Laura, a woman who has walked through the storm and found peace in her own soul, a woman who has learned to love herself. I take a sip of my tea, the gentle sweetness of chamomile spreads through my mouth. I smile. Life still has so much beauty to offer, and this time, I'm going to live it for myself. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.